Since it first started tumbling into Ireland through the old pirate coves of West Cork and in the stomachs of drug mules coming from Miami, cocaine has become the drug of our nation. It has swept in like a blizzard, dusting every corner of every small town, and so swift and total has its spread been that the Irish are now some of the biggest users in the world. But to unravel how a small island like ours on the edge of Europe ended up such a big player in the major cocaine leagues, we must follow the white supply lines back to the beginning. We must follow the routes it has taken as it travels across the globe. And most importantly, we need to follow the cowboys who put us on the map. So join me, Nicola Talent, for my new live show, Cocaine Cowboys, the story of Ireland's love affair with Colombia's biggest export. Limited tickets now available for February 10th at the Lime Tree Theatre in Limerick, February 15th in Cork's Everyman, and at Dublin's 3 Olympia on Sunday, February 18th. Tickets available at venues or on mcd.ie. The first person before the courts on an Encrochat case was an Irish guy, a haulier called Thomas Bomber. We've spoken about him on the podcast a number of times, and we had quite a lot of detail in the Sunday World newspaper and on sundayworld.com in relation to him. But it was interesting that, you know, it was an Irish guy and that he was a haulier. Like, I mean, this was somebody who was working for anybody. But the transport of drugs is obviously so significant. It's one of the most important parts of the trade, the transport routes, you know, the trusted transporter, etc. But in the last few weeks, another Irish guy has been caught doing exactly the same thing. And again on Encrochat, a guy called Anthony Terry, who was maybe long forgotten here in Ireland since 2006 when he went sort of on the run.
Yeah, I think he was certainly hoping he was forgotten. So Anthony Terry in 2006, as you mentioned, was a taxi driver in Limerick, and he was caught with 40 grand's worth of cannabis, and he got a 6-year sentence. I think there was details there of the court case where he was kind of more or less pleading that he was under a serious threat, and he was made to work on behalf of these nefarious individuals who were somewhere in the background and threatened to rape his wife and attack his family. And
2006, of course, was a time in Limerick which was very volatile.
It would have been at the height of all that, and there would have been some extremely violent characters. As we know, the 3 Dundon brothers who are serving life sentences being chief among them, and there was a genuine fear, I'd say, for a lot of people, even those who were willingly involved in crime, were probably starting to question their career choice at that stage, even if the money was good. Yeah, so he got a 6-year sentence, but he was only, I think, a couple of weeks into it, and was able to organise himself being sent to Limerick Hospital, from where he did a runner and pretty much stayed out of I suppose he avoided the long arm of the law in Ireland then for a long time, and until I think it was in February 2021, we hear of him again when he gets arrested in Belfast with 1.8 million sterling worth of cocaine. So he had a good run, I guess. And obviously
certainly. And in all that time, he was presumably, from what we know from the National Crime Agency investigation, because Terry is one of 4 people that have been sentenced to more than 53 years in prison in the UK in relation to this. This was a grouping, a gang, a transport facilitator for drugs gangs that were identified on these Encrochat phones, that hack in 2020 from around the April to the June period of time, which has netted thousands of criminals in the UK and in other jurisdictions. But basically all the criminals were using these particular phones, Encrochat phones. They didn't realise, but the French police had worked out how to crack into the system and were listening live, and they were feeding all the jurisdictions, including Ireland and the UK and the Netherlands, with live information about what was going on. And Terry's network was sort of seen as bringing drugs in they were collecting the drugs, I think, were they in Rotterdam, driving them across Europe and then across to the UK and onwards to Ireland. Particularly, he had connections with some of the Limerick gangs.
It seems he had connections with all sorts of people, but definitely with the Limerick gangs as well. I mean, like our sources were suggesting that, you know, he was directly linked in with members of the McCarthys. And we know he was based in Wolverhampton, which is near Birmingham, again, where Eds McCarthy had been based for quite some time and had forged links with Bomber Kavanagh, and something you've written about. And it very much pushed the kind of the McCarthys back up, I suppose, the pecking order in the criminal underworld. Since I suppose the horrible violent feud that went on that kind of dispersed members of the gang, and you had certain members turning on each other and all the rest. But Eds McCarthy had managed to stay out of that, and has pretty much re-emerged as a significant player. And without a doubt, Anthony Terry would have had direct dealings with him. Now, he was described by the NCA as the kingpin of this logistics operation. And then they used, as far as I know, they kind of had their own surveillance operation on them after coming on the radar, thanks to the Encrochat hack. And then that information then was used, I think, to look into their activities thereafter. And there was one particular journey, it caught my eye in a sense that it kind of shows you the direct link. So you had one of the drivers he was directing. There was two in particular that he was directing to go and collect consignments, and one of them was I think it was several €100,000 worth of cocaine, and he was picking it up from the Hook of Holland, which is directly across from Rotterdam. So which is, as we know, is a major kind of point now for the international drug gangs and the likes of the Kinahang cartel to ship their stuff into. And he drove it back through England. Went through Belfast. One driver then, left off something like 5.5 kilos in Wicklow, and then those other deliveries to Limerick. So you have a direct link from Rotterdam on a truck going straight into the market in Limerick or wherever in Wicklow, presumably South County Dublin from there on. So, and we know that, Rotterdam, the stuff is coming from, the likes of Peru and directly from the Colombian gang. So, it's even less than the usual 6 degrees of separation. It just shows you how tight the supply lines are. And again, how valuable people like Anthony Terry and, as you mentioned, Thomas Marr.
Because they're not only transporting drugs, they're transporting cash. They're transporting, obviously there's no evidence that Anthony Terry is transporting people, but, in other instances, people are seen as a commodity as well. The human trafficking, those same transport networks are moving everything, cash out, drugs in. Now, the NCA identified a Michael Collis, who was 63, who was acting as a driver for Terry. He was picking up the drugs in the Netherlands. There was two other drivers, Joshpal Singh Kotheria from Wolverhampton and Mohammed Omar Khan from Birmingham, who the NCA say were used to supply the drugs to customers in the UK or export them to the Republic of Ireland. They were using these encrypted messaging services, we know, and it was Terry who was instructing them to travel basically to the Netherlands, where to pick up the drugs, where to pick up the cash, and how to sort of bring them in, where to deliver them. So that's why he's seen as the kingpin. He's the director of operations for the grouping. There is some suggestion, certainly from the wording of the NCA, that he's smuggling drugs and cash for others, but that he may also be sort of smuggling his own stuff at the same time. The wording of their release suggests that, although I think the evidence they gave to the courts, and he, of course, Terry pleaded guilty to this, so we have just their statements to run on, but that they were taking orders for where to pick up and where to deliver.
Yeah.
For
it was very much the logistics. I mean, like one of them that came out in court, Collis picked up 18 kilos of cocaine in the Netherlands, and 10k was delivered to dealers in the UK, and 8 went on to Ireland. So, I mean, it's very much dropping stuff here and there. I mean, like you had one of the other guys, Kothira, was sent to East London to collect 10 kilos of cannabis and a vacuum packing machine, which were brought back to the Midlands, and the drugs then were packed there before being taken to County Leitrim. So it kind of shows you a whole business network, just like Lidl or Aldi or Tesco, like are getting their ice creams and their yogurts to their outlets. These guys are getting the cannabis and the cocaine out to the buyers. And
interestingly is the transport routes they're using, because we can see from the evidence the NCA obviously picked up the existence of this gang and the Encrochat hack, and proceeded to launch their own investigation into them. So they had them under surveillance, and Terry himself was in Wolverhampton the day the drugs were found in Belfast, and he was picked up there. It was his driver that was caught with it, basically in the back of the vehicle. But They are using the ferry network across Europe, the roads network, and in particular to come into the south of Ireland, they're using that open border from Belfast. So they're not actually coming into Rosslare, they're coming in through Belfast. Belfast Port is, I think, a big problem.
I think they're using any route. I mean, I think in this year the number of seizures in Rosslare have actually gone up quite significantly. Like there's been 3 fairly big cocaine seizures. So I mean, I think all ports have been used. And I suppose Rosslare has changed because of Brexit. I mean, it used to be very much kind of the holiday makers. There wasn't too much cargo traffic because it was just cheaper to go through the UK. Now with Brexit, there's a much bigger delay. So it's become economically viable to start sending trucks, through Rosslare to the French ports. And I think there's 5 times as much traffic on the routes now as there was. They're expanding the Europort in Rosslare. And with that it's going to come the drugs. I mean, like we've seen it, and we've been kind of keeping up to it a little bit on the SundayWorld.com in terms of, when there's big seizures, in the middle of the Atlantic or in Spain or Rotterdam, we write them up and it's there. And when you're following it, you're kind of going, there really is an enormous wave. Like off the top of my head, like there's been tons and tons of cocaine seized that is coming from South America to the European market, of which, a certain amount is going to be coming to Ireland, a certain amount of which the money being made from it is going to go to the Kinnan cartel or, people who were linked to them or still working for them or who've set up, on their own or have their own franchise within whatever setup they're using. I mean, it's just, and what these guys like Anthony Terry do and Thomas Mars, you mentioned, are, a key part of that, pipeline. It's kind of the nuts and bolts. It's where kind of reality meets kind of, wish fulfillment or whatever, to use kind of some of the online stuff. And I mean, and you talked about, the people trafficking. That was how Thomas Marr came onto the radar that time in 2019 when 39 Vietnamese people trying to gain entry into the UK died on a trailer that we know now was driven by a Northern Irish truck driver. And Thomas Marr came up in the investigations. Now, he was never prosecuted in that, but it put him up very much like it put a target on his back. And there was another one of his drivers also from Offaly, I think, who had been arrested in Wales and got a long stretch as well. So I mean, like Marr is he's doing what, 14 years for his part now. And
there's a proceeds of crime case against him as well. He was originally from Offaly and moved to England with his wife. Was living as, look, he was living a really good lifestyle with her. He would have told the neighbours that he was working hard transporting ordinary goods. But in actual fact, of course, he was taking a cut every time he provided a driver for a criminal organisation to transport whatever it was, cigarettes, alcohol, drugs or human beings. And he's been hit with a bill for what looks like about €750,000. He'll either have to sell up the house or whatever they're going to do to come up with that money. If they don't come up with that money in the UK, what they do is they give them extra time in prison. So you can get anything up to 10 years extra in prison if he doesn't pay up that bill. It's interesting you mention about, you're sitting on the desk there on SundayWorld.com and you're looking at the amount of stuff going on. A small snapshot at the beginning of January. You're talking literally about a week, maybe at the beginning of January. I just took a note of a couple of things that were going on, and there was 500 kilos of cocaine seized in Spain. There was an aircraft found in Portugal with cocaine hidden on it. There was reports that there are stockpiles of cocaine being kept in Africa in case there's bigger seizures like the likes of the MV Matthew, the 2-ton, whatever it is, that they can keep the Europe flooded with cocaine and keep the price fixed, because cocaine is cheap and they want to keep it cheap so as the middle class users basically can continue affording it and don't think twice about putting their hands in their pocket to buy it. There was the capture, obviously, of the Hader Cuera in Colombia. They were supplying 5 tons of drugs per month to Europe, so they captured the head of that. There was a synthetic drug lab found in Valencia, which was dismantled, and it was churning out 35 kilos of MDMA a week. And there was that, just before Christmas, there was the 10 million cocaine haul in Northern Ireland, which seems small compared to the other stuff. But when you consider the population that's furnishing in the north of Ireland, like that's a lot of cocaine.
Is, yeah.
Now that's was just a very small snapshot of the beginning of January. Of course, you have Ecuador, which is
now in turmoil,
in absolute
civil war practically after
yeah.
Vito escaped, and they've called a national emergency, and there was live TV hosts where guns put to their head, and it's crazy stuff.
Absolutely.
And Ecuador would have been seen
as a university taken over.
It would have been seen as a safe state, and I think some Americans even would have seen it as a place to go and retire, and you can live cheaply there. So I mean that's just turned it on its head, but it does show you like the fear, and I mean we said it before, and like the power of corruption, like of the narco money, of the cocaine money, is not something to be taken lightly. And I mean, and like we know that they're constantly targeting officials in ports, in police and various agencies, and whether it's customs or people who have access to information, like it's all extremely valuable, and it's hard to say no to that kind of money, and they have so much of it. Like it's a drop in the ocean. I mean, even just talking about, like we're saying, like there was 94 kilos today in Rotterdam. This is Thursday, by the way, whatever day you're listening to this. And earlier in the week, then on the 7th, there was 600 kilos in Rotterdam. So that's just Rotterdam. So I mean,
that's just what they get.
Yeah, and this is on the website from the.
Which cocaine are people taking? Like, I mean,
it does make you wonder. But I mean,
it?
But it is. I suppose it is the main point of entry. Is the European ports, Antwerp, Rotterdam, Valencia. And I'm sure they're going to be moving to other more secondary ports. Like, they'll be looking at ways, if the police...
Of course, I mean, if you look at Ireland, I mean, deep sea ports where anything is coming in, Belfast is a deep sea port, I think. And I think there's products coming there directly from Colombia. So that's a high risk.
Yeah, I think anywhere, I mean... I would imagine that if you're an international drug dealer, you're going to smuggle to a port where you can control the consignment, or at least have a chance of controlling it to some extent. So you know when it arrives, you know where it is.
Yeah, you're not leaving it to chance.
And you're able to get in. I mean, like reading the stuff about some of the so-called pickers in Rotterdam, you were over there, you spoke to some people. And I mean, they're among the highest paid people now in the system there, that they're specialists, that they go into the port area and break into the maritime containers containing the cocaine and extract it and get it out. And they're getting very well paid for, I suppose, the riskiest part of the job.
It's like, I don't ever claim to understand economics at all, but how much legitimate money is flowing into the illegitimate economy at this stage?
Oh, there must be. I mean, what is it? 8% of people have used cocaine.
Well, like a third of the European cocaine market, they said, was 10 billion. So 30 billion a year.
Yeah, it's significant to say the least. Yeah, I mean, it puts it up there with I don't know, oil or something. It's a key economic factor. I mean, there's people, they're out there, working so they can go out at the weekends and buy a couple of beers. I'm sure there's plenty of people working hard and doing extra work so they can buy more cocaine because it attracts the ladies or attracts the men or whatever it is they're after. Or, I
think there's a bit of it that's probably about lack of confidence with people. Do you know what I mean? I think
but there's something innate about human nature about getting off your head.
Yeah, oh yeah, there's no doubt about it.
And that's the thing about the war on drug strategy, from the 1980s or, from further back, from the 1960s US, which was imported into Europe, doesn't really work, because it
ignores the fact that people like to escape.
People love drugs. Yeah. And that's the important, and some people, like it too much and it does incredible harm to them. Like, I'm certainly not advocating go out and get stoned or get high or whatever, but like, I mean, it's a fact of life. And, I mean, it's just a flood at the minute.
But life is very pressurized, and I think people like to be able to find a way to just have a complete blowout. And
yeah, well, I suppose the upside of that is that you see all these gyms, and you know, and like, I mean, people in Ireland are very sporty, and we do exercise a lot, I think, compared to other people. So it's the other side. Yeah, it's the other side of the coin. Like, we're sports mad in this country, but not everyone's into sports either.
Yes,
but we are very much fitness crazy in this country. But then you hear about people using drugs so they can get fit, or like, you know, or beat their personal best, like, you know, and so they can be the fastest guy to do the lap around whatever local, you know, ring where people set up times on their bikes, and there's people using performance enhancing drugs so they can be the fastest 48-year-old to do the lap around the Curragh or whatever, like, you know.
The courts are certainly taking the likes of Anthony Terry and the logistics guys, the guys who probably aren't, you know, killing people, but they're taking them very seriously. He's after getting an enormous prison sentence.
He got 18 years for the seizure in Belfast, and then in December he got 25 years then for the conspiracy, which was directing the other guys.
Which is all the other stuff.
Yeah, so but it's running concurrently. So he went from an 18-year sentence to a 25-year sentence.
Right, okay.
So it was a double whammy, I suppose, in that sense. But I mean, I don't know, would you get... I mean, it's I suppose there have been sentences nearly that high in Ireland, 20, 25 years for directing kind of drug smuggling operations. But I suppose what judges do, like if you go into court, you know, and you're facing charges with having a couple of kilos of cocaine, and you say, well, look, I was forced into carrying it. I've you know, I suffer from drug addiction, and the guard, a witness kind of says, yeah, we found no evidence of any kind of high life, or this person wasn't making money, and we believe them that they were storing because they were trying to pay off their own drug debt and were getting €1,000 to carry out this run. Whereas the likes of Anthony Terry and Thomas Marr were people masquerading, I suppose, as legitimate businessmen who had a luxury lifestyle and were in it for the money. And, you know, so, I mean, at the very least, they're ripping off the state by running an illicit business. They're not paying any tax. But then there's all the harm that can be done by, you know, putting, you know, unchecked product onto the market, and you know, and people with their own cocaine addiction. So I think that's why I think judges take a firm view on people who are cold and calculated in their crimes. I mean, it shows intent. I mean, you know, that's the difference between murder and manslaughter's intent.
And a simple Google of Anthony Terry, you know, if you were the judge handing down a sentence, you could see that in 2006 in Limerick, and I'm taking this from the Irish Examiner, a story by Jimmy Wolfe, their Midwest correspondent there, who was in court at the time. He was talking about an inaugural meeting of the Limerick City Joint Policing Committee, who was told that drug gangs were basically owning people in the city as young as 15 over unpaid debts. And at the same time, Terry appears in court. He's aged 32 at the time, and he's admitting possession of 10 kilograms of cannabis worth the 40,000 that you were talking about. And in his defence, he says that he had a debt of €6,000, which he borrowed to buy a van, and this had been sold on to a drug dealer by his original lender. Because of delays in making repayments, the debt spiralled to €15,000, he said. The drug dealer threatened to rape the taximan's wife and 13-year-old daughter if he did not come up with the money. Now that we will accept, that the judge accepted that in the court at the time. But what's going on now, you know, all these years later? And has he learned his lesson from this, you know, getting muddled up in this in the first place in 2006 and having to put that before the court that his family were under threat because he was involved, you know, he was under duress, basically involved in this drug dealing and transporting drugs. But he goes on to make quite a career for himself in exactly that.
Yeah,
you know.
And he certainly doesn't appear to be the man under duress in this case. It's quite the opposite, as, you know, Walter White's line in Breaking Bad, I'm the one who knocks. Like, he was the guy who was directing the others. So, like, he was the leader of this particular operation. Now, whether he was, I don't know, you know, a contractor working for bigger drug gangs like the McCarthy Dundons, or you know, for elements of the Kinnan cartel, and which it certainly seems that's certainly kind of the way it's put across, that, you know, he was the transport service, the go-to transport service for both Irish and English gangs who wanted to get their drugs from Holland into the UK and Ireland. That, you know, you call this guy. And Thomas Marr was obviously the same. And I'm sure there's others out there as well that we haven't heard of.
Well, what we know for a fact is he didn't learn his lesson from 2006 when he got mixed up in that and had his family under threat. He went on to make a big career out of the exact same activities. And certainly, I think if you were a judge looking back at that, you'd be inclined to maybe
throw a bit more of the book at him.
A bit more of the book at him, yeah.
But even
so beware of Google, everybody.
Well, maybe that's the reason why he was in a hurry to finish his sentence early, because there was too much money to be made, and he wasn't going to spend at least 4 years knocking around in Limerick Prison when he could be out there earning big bucks.
Yeah, and locating in the UK as well shows that kind of the serious, in the same way as Thomas Bomber did. It shows that kind of serious ambition to be in the right place, because you've obviously got all of the UK to cover, and then you can very easily slip into Ireland, certainly through the north. Okay, so thanks for that, Eamon.
It was a pleasure, Nicola.
Thank you. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.